welcome to the President's Tech Brief. I'm your host, Ylli, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Martijn. Martijn.
Hey, Ylli, great to be back after
Good to
my
see
UK
you.
trip.
Yeah, we missed you last week. For everyone tuning in for the first time, the name of this show is a nod to the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. That briefing is the gold standard of intelligence, summarizing the most critical threats and developments for the President of the United States. I've seen that process firsthand. I know how vital that flow of information is, but we've also seen the gaps. So the traditional brief often struggles to keep pace with the sheer speed of emerging technology and how it's reshaping our national power.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, I've spent my career on the intelligence side. I know how hard it is to connect technical data to real-world strategy in a way that's actually actionable. That gap is why we're here, and that's exactly why we're doing this show.
You're right, Martijn. I mean, we wanted to move really these conversations out of our conference room and directly to you. So every Friday at 11 a.m., you'll find us here live on YouTube, Instagram, Substack, LinkedIn, all available platforms. So please tune in, call in, and let us know your comments. What you can expect every week really is we will translate policy for the technologists and DC decision maker to technology space. So, I mean, and then you'll hear the latest from the global tech competition we are in with China. Martijn, if you want to provide a clear explanation of what the viewers can see on our screen right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first ticker at the bottom of your screen is our tech scorecard. Get used to seeing this. It's our definitive look at the US-China tech race. So we're tracking the strategic front line in real time. When the balance shifts, we'll be here to tell you why. Now, keep an eye out. Next Wednesday, we will release a new tech scorecard on industrial robotics. It's going to be a very informative report. I highly encourage you to check it out. The URL is on the ticker, scorecard.scSP.ai, so be sure to visit that site on Wednesday for the latest from the world of robotics. The other ticker is our news feed. So this is an AI-enabled news feed that we created so that you have the absolute best news available on the things that matter. We help you cut through the noise. Finally, we want to hear from you. So post a comment wherever you're watching or send your take to our Signal handle. That handle is SCSP.250, and we're live monitoring your questions. So that handle again on Signal is SCSP.250.
Yeah, you're right, Martijn. So please don't hesitate. Send us good, bad feedback, whatever's in your mind. We have a lot to cover today, Martijn. I mean, there's a lot going on. We're joined here at the table by Ylli and Chip on our team. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to see you back. We will cover Iran shortly, but before we jump on our table analysis, I want to welcome Mark Montgomery, who is joining us by Zoom to start with an update on Iran. Mark Montgomery served as an admiral in the United States Navy, but also has served in some of the most important jobs that you can have, both at EUCOM, CENTCOM, and INDOPACOM. So, Mark, good to have you.
Thanks. And as an executive director of a federal commission, the most important job you can have, Ylli.
I agree, Mark. So let's start with what is your assessment with how the war has gone so far and where are we today?
Look, from a military perspective, I think Admiral Cooper and General Kane, set up a plan for a 3 to 4 week sustained air campaign to take out the IRGC leadership
As an
executive director of a federal commission, the most important job you can have. Take out the IRGC leadership and facilities to strike their actual missiles facilities in production, their drones facilities in production, their air defense systems. That's pretty much done. Their maritime systems, ships, but also fast attack craft and mines, and then finally the remnants of their nuclear program. I think they're hitting about 1,000 targets a day. Right now, maybe 1,100, which is really high for the number of aircraft that they're contributing to this. But I think the reason that number is creeping up is we're starting to use bomber forces, which really bring a lot extra to play. So from a purely military point of view, I think that from a purely military point of view, I think they're doing a very good job sourcing these targets. The problem they're going to have, and I'm sure we'll discuss it, is what happens when political pressure starts to try to drive you to a faster completion. This is a major military, economic adversary. This is the 4 weeks is about the right length of a strike plan. I think they're doing a very good job.
Thanks, Mark. My other question would be, since you have covered the broader region, both in the Middle East, in Europe, and Asia Pacific, what do you think are the implications for how other great powers are viewing what's going on inside Iran in regards to this operation?
Well, for Russia, there's a very specific issue. You know, we have historically called Israel the model ally because they gave enough, military assistance. They spent enough on the military. They bought from the United States, and they were there and stood by us, in different operations. Ukraine is clearly showing itself to be a model ally with their support with the ground-based UASs. My gut reaction is that Russia now looks like the model adversary because they have been alleged to be providing intelligence support to Iran on targeting U.S. ships and aircraft. So that's going to be a big issue. I think over time, the president's not going to be able to avoid that. I think China is a secondary thing. It's not that how Trump sees it, it's how they see it. And they have to be a little concerned if the United States is able to successfully take control of the Straits of Hormuz and demonstrate that, 12,000 miles away, we can assert our power to do that sort of thing. So from my perspective, I think that's a significant, that'll be a significant lesson learned for the Chinese. They've seen it before. They know we have the ability to project power, but doing it this way against a reasonably well-armed and, capable adversary, I think is a strong message.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I wanted to ask you about the cyber element to all this. So you've described cyber as a first mover in this conflict to disrupt IRGC command and control. Is the United States currently doing enough to protect domestic critical infrastructure from the drive-by cyber retaliation that you've warned Iran might attempt? I wanted to ask.
Yeah, so I would say before this started, I would have said no. I think your team would as well, that we just don't spend enough on the security of our critical infrastructure in cyberspace. A handful of sectors are okay. Large banks, the defense industrial base, electrical power generation that's anchored with nuclear power systems. Areas we regulate pretty heavily. Pretty much everything else, our water systems, our healthcare systems, our education systems, our rural electrical systems, are dumpster fires of critical infrastructure protection. And I'm very worried, and they're vulnerable. Now, look, Iran's not China or Russia, but Iran can, through hacktivist groups, do damage. I think we're seeing that with Stryker, and I think we'll see it with other companies. But these are temporal, micro attacks. I don't think Iran is able to put together a macro attack that takes down either a sector or regionally does a significant amount of critical infrastructure disruption. But China and Russia can, and this is a good signal to us that even a less skilled adversary can do damage to the United States, and our companies and our government should be investing more significantly in the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure.
Do you guys want to ask one last question maybe to Mark?
Mark, great to see you this morning. My question to you is, how do you rate the Iranian military response so far? Anything that they've done that surprised you? And how do you evaluate the U.S. military's ability to achieve this goal that General Kane stated at the outset, to eliminate Iran's ability to project power outside its border? See you this morning.
Yeah, thanks. So first, I'll take the last part first and say, since we clearly aren't trying to get regime change, or at least aren't doing an effective job of it, that is the actual principal mission here, to limit Iran's ability to project power outside of it. And I think we will be successful in that. I have been impressed with certain parts of the Iranian response. First of all, their ability to target and hit missile radars and control centers and is impressive. Hitting like the bird, trying to hit a hotel, not impressive. I mean, if you want to hit critical infrastructure, we can't defend everything everywhere all at once. I have been disappointed. I mean, you guys at SCSP and me know from our time in Ukraine that there was an obvious need. You can't just rely on aircraft with APKWS rockets or missiles to defend your critical infrastructure against a drone attack. You needed a ground-based drone system like General Cherry's Bullet or Octopus, or probably the best system, Eric Schmidt's Mirops. All these systems, $5,000 to $15,000, 75 to 95% likelihood of hitting a Shahed. Those should have been in play. They're getting in play now very abruptly and haphazardly with Ukrainian assistance. But that was something that was completely predictable 2 years ago, 18 months ago, 12 months ago. And the failure of the United States and its Arab partners to really tackle this issue is causing a lot of damage.
Mark, thank you so much for your time. As always, great insights. And we'll make sure to bring you back on as this unfolds. But again, appreciate your time, Mark.
Thank you very much, Ylli.
Okay, Chip, Ilber, you heard a little bit of what Mark said. Chip, we saw the chairman this morning really acknowledging the loss of lives among our service members. So our thoughts and prayers go with their families and their loved ones. Where do you think we are today in this campaign, Chip?
That's right. So CENTCOM acknowledged that they found the bodies of the 6 airmen who were lost in the tanker crash over Western Iraq. Also, the French government publicly acknowledged that they lost a soldier as well. In terms of the objectives that General Kane outlined, I mean, I think it's been a really impressive first 13 days of the military campaign. Thousands of targets struck. Estimates that I've seen indicate that Iran's ballistic missile launchers have been degraded, 80 up going on 90% at this point, taking out command and control facilities, hammering their navy, as Admiral Montgomery was indicating. But a couple things haven't happened, and I think they're worth acknowledging, and that is the regime hasn't collapsed yet. I think there's been acknowledgement this morning that perhaps Supreme Leader Khamenei may be severely wounded but still alive. Meanwhile, the Iranian regime has designated his son as the appointed successor, perhaps temporarily. And the populace in Iran hasn't yet risen up to overthrow the government. Perhaps that's yet to come, but so far we haven't seen widespread protests around the country yet. The regime's ability, as the Admiral was indicating, to attack shipping and their neighbors has been pretty severe over the last couple of days. They've struck 16 vessels across the Persian Gulf, attacked oil and gas infrastructure, resulting in the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is having ripple effects across the region and across the global economy.
What's your take on this?
Yeah, I guess, I would like to take it in a slightly different direction. We spent a lot of time here at SCSP looking at how the future character of warfare is evolving. So I've been sort of trying to keep track of some of the first we're seeing in this campaign, which I think is characterized by incredible speed, intensity, and new technologies. So let me just tick through some here. So use of one-way drones on the part of the U.S. military. That's clearly a first. Use of PRISM, which is Army's new long-range missile strike capability that has now been used in combat. Active participation by other combatant commands. We had Indo-PACOM submarine sinking an Iranian ship off the coast of Sri Lanka. We had European command assisting with the defense of Turkey. So 3 geographical combatant commands working seamlessly in addition to the functional commands, which are STRATCOM, Cybercom, and SpaceCom. Chairman Kane today mentioned the use of artillery to sink Iranian ships, including a submarine. which is quite significant. But I would also really foot stomp the use of AI, which is, I think, what is really supercharging this campaign. If you look at the numbers and when you put them in the historical context, it's just incredible, the sheer scope and size of this campaign. In the first day, U.S. struck over 1,000 targets in Iran. If you look at the Russian campaign against Ukraine, they averaged, I think, about 160 targets during the first day. 13 days in, U.S. is over 6,000 targets struck in Iran. The entire war against Yugoslavia, which was 78 days, resulted in about a little over 900 targets struck. So just the size, the scope, the scale, the intensity, the pace of this conflict, I think it's just unprecedented. And I think for those who were doubting the U.S. military's ability to project power across long distances and in high-intensity tempos, I think should really rethink their assumptions.
Incredible, truly incredible. Martin?
Yeah, more of a question, and maybe Chip, you would be the best person to ask. So I'm intrigued by this dynastic handoff of power under fire, and it seemed to be engineered largely by the IRGC. So what does that mean for the future of the Islamic Republic, right? It wasn't designed for this type of power transfer.
Well, you're referring to Mojtaba Khamenei, who's the son of the supreme leader. He has long been identified as a potential successor to the supreme leader. Has been a candidate in a kind of quiet rivalry with some of the other leaders in Iran to sort of jockey for succession. I think what this clearly indicates, however, is the regime is digging in. The regime is not changing its nature or its character. It doesn't give signs that it's going to capitulate or give in as a result of the campaign. So I think that's the bottom line message. Now, his ability to remain in power and to drive events beyond the conclusion of this conflict, whenever that arises, is not yet clear. I think there's still a lot to be decided when we see what's resulted from this conflict.
Martin, I think we have a question online. I think the question is really, there's been a lot of, I think, discussion how Ukraine can help support the Gulf countries in this effort. So is there a way that this will be sort of like a net loss for Ukraine as they try to ramp up like support for Gulf countries, because they have to maintain their front, their war against Russia? So how do you guys view this whole like balance that we have now, which is like we have to surge obviously in support of Gulf allies and partners, but on the other hand, Ukraine is in the middle of a major conflict with Russia.
I think in the short term, it's sort of a net negative for Ukraine for a couple of reasons. One is the United States is rapidly depleting its stock of interceptor missiles and other munitions, so they're not going to be available for provisioning Ukraine for its defense. The other is the price of oil, right? So last I checked, Brent crude was at $99 per barrel, which is up from around $70 prior to the conflict. The United States just announced yesterday it was easing sanctions on Russian oil sales. So Russia is going to be acquiring more financial resources as a result of this, which will improve their position in the ongoing conflict with Ukraine.
I think in my view, operationally, the two campaigns are not necessarily in conflict or not competing for some of the same resources. The Ukrainians, I think, have mastered the game of countering Iranian Shahed drones, and Ukrainians are now offering that assistance to the Gulf nations. I think they've sent delegations to at least 3 countries. But Ukrainians, what they appear to need more are Patriot missiles, air defense systems that can help their defenses against cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. So I think as the U.S. military removes the ballistic missile threat off the CENTCOM theater, the threat going forward remains the Shaheeds, and that's where Ukrainians can help. And that, I think, they have high-density assets in place. And then we could shift the resources to the Ukrainian theater to help them with their missile defenses. So I think there's complementarity between the two theaters.
Yeah, I would add on this whole issue of Russia benefiting short-term. I don't think, a couple of billions of dollars will help Russians really ramp up, which is like a completely degraded economy from the war. You know, like it might help them maybe for a couple of weeks, but I think in the long term, I think, I think Scott Besson said this is only like 30-day, I think, waiver for oil that is already at sea. And so I think Russia's position has not been something to envy in the last couple of months. I mean, if you look around, Bashar al-Assad gone from Syria, Maduro gone from Venezuela, and now you have the Iranian regime really completely in tatters, probably, like for the lack of a better word. Like I don't know what else to say, but like I think yes, it's difficult maybe for Ukrainians right now to understand that Russia might got some relief from us in terms of oil sale, but I don't think this will help us much, Russia. I think another thing to watch, Martin, would be this, like the President's Trump and Xi Jinping summit later this month in China.
Exactly.
And how this really leads up to that. I think, this campaign has, as we all discussed over and over again, has been a military success, the pace, speed, and scale, and all those things. And I think it's something that if I was in Beijing and Moscow, I would really watch carefully how we can do these kind of operations, at the same time. Like Gilbert said, we just had the operation against Maduro a couple of weeks ago, and now I think our forces surged in the Middle East to do this campaign in the Middle East. So, but over to you guys for any thoughts.
Yeah, well, in Ukraine, I think also by providing assistance to the Gulf countries and to the United States, they can position themselves for a quid pro quo, right? And ask for additional assistance from the United States, for example, in their war against Russia. So perhaps for the long term, Ukraine may actually come out ahead, net.
Chip, anything you want to add?
No.
For me, I think the one striking and perhaps disappointing aspect of it is just looking at the information environment. I mean, there's so much disinformation around this campaign, and there's so much, I think, almost willing perpetuation of Iranian regime narratives in online and skepticism around the campaign. So I think in that aspect, I think the U.S. is lagging. I think the U.S. could do much better in the information environment. I think the Iranians are probably benefiting from Russian bots and troll farms and other things to amplify their message. But it's a stark difference, I think, between what you read in public media and what the metrics from the war suggest.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think this whole issue of strategic confidence that we seem to have it's like a diminished return over time because we expect all these things to be solved overnight, that the military campaign will deliver fast. I think just benefits actors that use our open information space to propagate against our efforts and our objectives. So I'm with you there. I just think we have to be more confident in our goals, in our objectives. Obviously, our military has demonstrated time and again that they can do these things. So I agree with you there. We still are open to all the disinfo campaigns that anybody can launch against our country.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, again, we saw this in the opening stages of the Russia-Ukraine war, right? The information space is a key battleground, and to your point, we're not doing enough on that front. Yeah. And that narrative, that perspective that not just Americans have, but people around the world, that makes a lot of difference into how an operation like this is ultimately conducted.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We will move now to the next session. So we will invite David Lin to join us here at the table. Obviously, China and topics around China every week present a lot to cover, Martin.
Yeah, exactly. Never a dull moment there.
So last week we started covering the plenary, the outcomes, and so like the 5-year plan. There's been some more conversation about that this week, so David will cover that issue. And then I think OpenClaw shutdown. First, welcome full arms in China, and then shutdown, so we'll cover that as well. And then I think the recently announced summit in Paris between our Secretary of Treasury and his Chinese counterpart, and lead up to the president's visit to Beijing. So, David, welcome back.
Thanks, Ylli.
Ryan will cover your topic later in the show, but good to have you back. So David, I talked a lot about all the topics we're going to cover. Over to you.
No, yeah. So the 2 sessions just wrapped up this week, and what we talked about some of the headlines that came out last week, which was the biggest headline was the unveiling of the 15th five-year plan. But this week, I really wanted to focus in on what people actually said at the NPC, the National People's Congress, and at the CPPCC, the China's People's Political Consultative Conference. And according to Chinese readouts, DeepSeek and AI were mentioned prominently throughout the week and a half long session. And embodied AI and large-scale AI models made it for the first time into the annual report. So all to say, AI was a prominent theme of the week. And just to highlight a couple of the speakers who, it's the NPC and the CPPCC are really interesting phenomenons because it's an opportunity for Chinese tech executives in particular to kind of shed their corporate titles and put on their like government party hats, right? Because they're attending this as party delegates, essentially. And so we saw Zhou Hongyi, who is the CEO of Qihu 360, which is one of China's biggest private cybersecurity companies, close ties to the security services, close ties to the PLA. But he proposed a national system to coordinate AI inference computing power. So a lot of emphasis on AI infrastructure from a cybersecurity company. We had Lei Jun, who's the CEO and founder of Xiaomi, one of China's larger smartphone manufacturers, in his capacity as a NPC deputy, talk about the importance of humanoid robots. I know next week we have some new analysis that we'll be sharing with the crowd on robotics. Putting an emphasis, and this is coming from a smartphone manufacturer, putting an emphasis on hardware, the hardware stack of AI, of automation, of humanoid robots, again, of embodied AI. And then we had, thirdly, He Xiaopeng, who is famously the CEO of XPeng, which is an EV company. And he chose to focus his time on talking about this thing called low altitude economy, which in China is a reference to a couple things like drones, but also notably about flying cars.
Right.
And so you can imagine just, all the innovations that are happening in that space, both in China and also in the US. But low altitude economy was another term that was thrown around. So these speeches span from things like AI on the software side to AI on the physical AI and embodied hardware side. Which again, I think just puts another spotlight on how AI was a key theme throughout the NPC. So,
David, one thing that struck me is the anti-involution language. And so, I mean, in my mind, that was effectively admitting that the industrial policy machine was leading to overproduction. What's your read on that?
That was actually another interesting proposal that was put forward by the head of the Beijing Institute for Artificial General Intelligence, or some variation of that, which is this think tank research institute in Beijing that focuses on AGI essentially. And the head of that organization pointed out this friction in, or what people refer to as involution, which is that competition is so heavy inside of China, especially on the talent piece, where companies are just poaching talent left and right. We saw last week or a couple of weeks ago, the head of Alibaba's open source AI model, Qi Wen, just left. It'll be interesting to see where he pops back up. But there's a lot of competition in the Chinese ecosystem right now in the AI space over talent, over market share, and they're really undercutting each other in the space, to the point to where Xi himself has called for the tech ecosystem writ large to really just like take a breath, calm down, and stop knifing each other and really focus on progressing AI development forward as a country. And I think that's another key message that came out of the NPC too.
David, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the whole OpenClaw.
Sure.
Introduction first. I think we have an incredible graphic showing people lined up, actually, especially old people, to have this agentic AI installed. And then Beijing moved forward to shut it down. Right? A really interesting development.
That's right. Yeah, no, and this is a great segue from, the NPC, very high level policy talk about AI to the grassroots level of AI, where, yes, we saw a huge popular outpouring of, just ordinary people on the streets of China coming out to want to use agentic AI in their everyday lives. A fun exercise to kind of step back, right? So in case everyone's not following what OpenClaw is, right? It started off as Claudebot, evolved to Moltbot, and then changed its name to OpenClaw, which was then acquired, or the founder was then hired by OpenAI. Now, there's this thing called Moltbook, which is the social media platform for agentic AIs built by Claudebot, which was then acquired recently this week, I think, last week by Meta.
Yeah.
So we all tracking all the names. No, so it's a really interesting, and it goes to show how fast this space is moving, right? Like name changes, acquisitions, and it's hitting China at the same velocity, to the point to where people at the NPC are talking about it. People on the streets are lining. So there are photos of thousands of people lined up outside Tencent headquarters in Shenzhen, lining up so that Tencent engineers can help everyday users install Claudebot onto their phones and tailor it so that they can use it in their everyday lives. And there's a couple interesting things driving this, right? Which is one, it's a testament to how hungry people are in China to adopt AI into their everyday lives. And two, I think going back to this idea of involution, of competition inside of China, it really speaks to how everyday people in China are looking for every ounce of advantage that they can use, including agentic AI, to help them do their jobs better, to help them compete better, to help them study better. And I think that's what we can take away from these images of
what
hundreds
fascinates
of
me,
people.
David, is that sometimes I think we live in two different ecosystems, but the popularity of OpenClaw, like in Beijing, really shows you that there are not two different ecosystems. Actually,
absolutely.
This is
I mean, they're having
glass
install
house,
parties, they're
right,
having
like
branded merchandise. It's
that
incredible.
They follow really carefully what happens in the United States and all these tech developments.
Yeah, and the interesting twist to this too is since it caught so much fire and became so viral, Beijing actually stepped in again to kind of pull the reins, right? Because as we know, OpenClaw is great, you can build these AI agents out of it, but it also brings in a whole slew of cybersecurity vulnerabilities and supply chain vulnerabilities, and that's what Beijing saw. And so it's not banned in China, but they, entities like CNCERT, the CAC, MIT in China issued advisories basically warning, individuals like to take precautions when you integrate this into your software stack, because it does open you up to vulnerability.
But the genie's out of the bottle, right? So
genie's out
you're
of the
not
bottle,
going to
that's right.
stuff it back in there. But the broader issue is like that hunger for the diffusion of these technologies in China. There's a marked contrast with here in the United States, where there's quite a bit more skepticism, I think, about the utility and the desirability of these types of tools. So that's definitely a trend that we're watching closely here. So,
David, last topic for you is obviously there's a big meeting this weekend happening in Paris between Scott Bessent and his counterpart. But I think this is all leading up to the big summit that President Trump is going to have with Xi Jinping in Beijing. You have covered this from, I think, the first live show we've had. Where do you think we are as we are, inching closer to that trip?
Yeah, I think this will probably be one of the last minister level meetings ahead of Trump's visit to Beijing, which last I saw was supposed to start on the 31st of March, so in just 2 weeks. And press reports, pretty much everything is on the table, it sounds like, from aircraft engines to soybeans to export controls to oil sales to all sorts of rare earths. So yeah, I mean, we'll really have to see. I hear some press reporting saying that market access restrictions or market access is going to be another thing on the table about Chinese companies doing business in the U.S. We've seen some precedent of perhaps what the U.S. government position may be going into this with TikTok, for example, and some of the data localization regulations that came with that. We'll see if any of that sets a precedent of what's to come. But yeah, I think all eyes will be focused on this summit coming up in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Martijn, what's your take on that?
Well, timing is everything, right? I mean, Besant is going to Paris in a time of extreme flux when it comes to supply chains, oil, energy. We'll have to keep a close eye on what comes out of it, but there's a lot at stake at these discussions. Obviously, a very important tee up to the Xi-Trump summit in a few weeks' time.
And to tie it back,
I also think the Japanese Prime Minister will be in Washington, I think before the trip, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Takaichi-san is supposed to be here in, I think, a week and a half.
Yeah.
And just to tie it back to the 15th five-year plan too, and the preamble of the plan, there was a subtle nod by Beijing to all the crises that are currently spinning around the world, and in the sense that China's entering the next 5 years are going to be a very volatile time, and we saw some of that reflected in the opening statements coming out of the 15th five-year plan. So.
Thank you, David, as always. Martijn, should we move on to our next topic?
Yeah. AI plus education.
We had a great summit on Wednesday that our colleague Ryan here helped put together. I mean, it was incredible just to have a range of speakers talking about how AI really is changing education forever. And I think we're going to watch a quick video from some of the key speakers and their takeaways. And then I think we'll continue the conversation with you, Ryan.
Right.
Competition for the future will be won or lost in the classroom.
Big things happen in times of crisis. Like some outside force comes along, and that's what makes it different.
Because I think it is hitting most of the CEOs. They're all cutting first-year hires in half, except for the ones who say they're not. Everybody else is. They just don't want to acknowledge it because nobody wants to bear the grief.
It is for real. It's not going away. It is a matter of, do we want to win this race that has literally no end game to it, or do we take second place? Second place is not going to be pretty.
Tools, when designed properly and used correctly, can actually give us much more transparency into employment decisions than we've ever seen before.
I am not worried about teachers. I think teaching is probably top 3 safest jobs in an AI world. My sister is a biology teacher in New Orleans. I said, you are safe.
We're looking right now at 9% recent college graduate unemployment. That's kind of unprecedented. I believe that'll go to 33, 35% within the next 2.5 years. If that happens, why'd I drop 200 grand on a traditional 4-year education?
Can't wake up and not read 7 different articles about AI's impact. Now, the key is what Gina said, and that is actually doing, not just talking.
Political standpoint, it's never a good bet to bet against the United States. There's,
Incredible summit. I mean, we had private sector companies, you had universities, you had new model schools like Alpha School, you had Khan Academy founder Sal Khan speaking. I mean, really incredible day for those of you interested really in how the future of education is going to look like. I think that was the place to be. But what was your key takeaway, Ryan?
I think the big takeaway is, if you think about every school in America, the banner they have is preparing tomorrow's leaders today. And that summit captured that idea. Like, education is preparing you for the future. And how do you do that with AI? You get every leader together, you get every educational entity, you get governors, you get congressional leaders, you get schools, you get K through 12, and you get in one place and we talk about the future. And there are 2 big takeaways for me. One is the urgency of the moment. There's so much change hitting our nation with AI and the revolution that is here. And schools are not exempt from that. And I was really encouraged, though, by the energy in the room, by the folks who are really dedicated to this and are on the front lines of preparing kids and students in college and lifelong learners, adult learners in there. And just to double tap on Sal Khan, having Sal Khan there is such a huge thing to have someone say, no, human skills are super relevant. Teachers are still relevant. These skills are going to be ubiquitous across our country. It's just getting access to that. I'm so happy we had former governors there, because governors are really in charge by our American system, how education happens at the state level. And so at every level of government, every level of education was really hit there. I was actually super impressed. There were 2 big announcements there too. Deputy Secretary Sonderling talked about the AI Workforce Hub, which is actually getting companies together to talk about how AI is affecting their companies so that we can get a better picture of how AI's impact the economy. But also Senator Warner talked about legislation he's introducing with Senator Rounds to study the future of the economy. And what undergirds that? Education. And so I think to me, it's there's so many things in the air, but it was such a hopeful tone at the end that we are going to control this destiny. This is wherever we go, it will be because we chose to go there. And if I can quote Star Wars, and particularly Andor, we are fighting for a sunrise we won't see. The investments we make today will be a future that's worth it, that will help America stay competitive.
Couldn't agree more, right?
Yeah, no,
This is a future, not one to fear, but one that we shape. That's one of the key takeaways from a great conference.
Yeah. For those, I mean, if people still want to watch these sessions, they're all available on our YouTube channel. But Ryan, as I said in my opening remarks, the educational system is still a result of the industrial age. For a period that information was static and it was only available in the classroom. We live now in a completely different era. Like, information is ubiquitous. It exists everywhere. With AI, it has accelerated. And so how do you now change the educational system for the era that we live in? One of the comments I got on my LinkedIn was from David Timmis, and I think our team can pull it up, but he says it's high time for an overhaul of our educational model. And while we somehow didn't manage to leverage the COVID-19 disruption to push something much needed change, I really hope we will be able to do so in the age of AI.
Gone are the days where you get a 4-year degree and stay in a field for 30 years and get a gold watch when you retire. It is now more about learning on the fly and reskilling and upskilling in place. And that's one thing where I think America does really knock it out of the park is we have so many available resources. It's just so overwhelming. Right. And so I think it's just understanding the landscape and being just educational. And I love that about SCSP is we actually educate about where the resources are and provide our own resources. But more importantly, I think if you are out there in the field right now and feel like you're under duress, like it is a time to start thinking about, how can I take part in this? How can I use these tools that are available to me? Because you're right, there will be skills that are still necessary. The plumbers and carpenters, my brothers in doing HVAC, they still need to go to school and actually learn on the fly there. But there's also a lot for their kids to learn about how to use these tools themselves. So it's adding more elements. It's there's new industries that are going to come out that I think is going to require. It won't be centered just on those brick and mortar schools. It's going to have to be more holistic in terms of outside entities adding into that. That includes government, that includes philanthropy, that includes the Alpha School model too. There's going to have to be a full spectrum approach to this.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I thought Deputy Secretary Sonderling's remarks were so poignant, right? That shift away from that college for all model to one where we have apprenticeships, right? The administration's goals is to have 1 million apprenticeships in the next few years where people learn the necessary skills, learn how to work side by side with robots, maintain and program robots, a whole bunch of other AI-related skills. And that ultimately is the future, right? A diverse, highly skilled workforce, but you don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree in order to do that. And frankly, if you teach the skills directly at your site of employment, it works even better because then we're directly feeding into the American innovation ecosystem. It boosts our economic competitiveness. And that's where we're headed.
What's so funny about that is that's actually going backwards to go forward. That's a medieval version of where blacksmiths would have an apprentice where they teach them how to use those tools to create plows and swords. So actually and that's why humans still matter, because you need to have someone beside you kind of guiding on the practice to show you the tools that are necessary to maintain a profession.
I thought Secretary Raimondo had incredible remarks. Again, watch it because she and former governor of Indiana, Eric Holcomb, were on the same panel, but I think she said something along the lines like, we don't want to be in a situation where years from now we have 15% unemployment because we couldn't shift now educational system and the talent pipelines. That's number one. And she said, this is once in a history you have a crisis like that makes you shift. And if you don't use this crisis, I think we will be in that situation that, we might end up with high unemployment. We might end up with humans that don't have a purpose. because technology and AI really can move in and do a lot of these things, a lot of these skills, and a lot of professions that we have done.
And people feel that tension. There's a lot of, and I think that was the big takeaway. Another big takeaway was there's an expectation that things are going to change, and so now people are looking for avenues, and that's why those announcements were so critical. But I think we're looking for even more solutions to this.
We're going to transition back to Iran, talk about the implications of the Strait of Hormuz closure. So we're going to go over to Studio B with Gavin, who's going to walk us through what some of the long-term implications of this closure are. Over to you, Gavin.
Jumping straight in, Middle Eastern exports form really the foundation of East Asia's two most critical industries, semiconductors and energy. Together, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea form 51% of global semiconductor manufacturing capacity, and any disruptions in those East Asian semiconductor manufacturing industries will be felt across the globe. Qatar alone supplies 65% of South Korea's helium, important in semiconductor wafer cooling, which leaves South Korea with only 6 months of helium reserves left. Similarly, South Korea imports 98% of bromine, important in semiconductor etching, from Israel. If any production centers in Israel and the Gulf states are hit, supply chip shortages and price hikes will happen across the globe. Additionally, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan rely heavily on imports to meet their energy needs. Japan imports 95% of its oil from the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz, which is now closed. And additionally, Taiwan meets 1/3 of its energy needs through Qatari liquefied natural gas. LNG production is critical to Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea's extremely energy-intensive semiconductor manufacturing industries. And a full restart of LNG production in the Middle East will take several weeks to several months, even under ideal circumstances after hostilities cease. Additionally, Taiwan and South Korea have moved to shift their supply chains to the United States to absorb shocks from the conflict in the Middle East. Yesterday, Taiwanese Premier Cho Jung-tai instructed the Taiwanese Ministry of Economic Affairs to import more liquefied natural gas from the Middle East. Additionally, the Republic of Korea National Assembly passed a bill to invest $350 billion into United States semiconductor and energy industries. Lastly, Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae, who, as Ylli and Martin mentioned, will be visiting Washington, D.C. and meeting with President Donald Trump on March 19th, announced that Japan will be releasing 80 million barrels of oil from its national reserves to help meet the global IEA 400 million barrel need. It goes without saying that any disruptions in East Asian energy and semiconductor manufacturing supply chains will be felt across the globe, particularly if the war drags on. Back to you, Ylli.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Really appreciate that great insight. And Ylli, it is time for AI in the Office.
AI in the Office, our favorite segment of the show, where we use or we ask one of our colleagues really to tell us how they used AI last week to do something to complement their work. So I know we have Raymond, who has an incredible case of how he used AI in the office this past week.
Hey everyone, my name is Raymond Jiang, and I help out with the Expo team here at SCSP. On the Expo team, we create an ebook, which is essentially a short list of brief biographies of all the speakers that we're bringing in. Now, compiling this ebook is always a tedious task. I thought to use AI to help speed it up. Let me show you how. So in early February 2025, renowned computer scientist Andrej Karpathy released the term vibe coding. It's this idea that you can use human language to input it into a large language model and have the large language model put out code for you and create an app. I told the LLM, which is Gemini, wrapped in the Google's newly released AI Studio, and I instructed it to take inputs of messy data that described the people and their job titles and spit out to me bios in a specific format I instructed it to. So this is a short list of speakers that we have brought in the past, and I'm just going to copy and paste that list. And so the first step I instructed it to do is to format it nicely so that we have a list of the speakers and their companies that they work for. And then I instructed the AI to research these people and create bios for me, and also find pictures to put inside of the ebook. So once the code has finally been processed, 2 out of our 4 speakers have a full bio loaded, and even for the ones that are not fully loaded, we have a bio, but we are lacking a picture. So I installed another feature upon iteration that allows you to edit, and then what we hit is copy image address. And we just paste that in to the image URL, and it puts him on. I will read over the bios real quick and just confirm that they are in line with the language that we want to use in our ebook. And then I will click the copy for Google Docs and then paste it into our AI Expo book. So we do a little bit of adjusting of the pictures. Even though this is not fully complete with all the pictures, at the end of the day, this process cut the time that I spend on this project by 1/3. And that's how I use AI in the office.
That was incredible, Martin.
Yeah, Raymond did a phenomenal job.
I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to use it. Any cases of AI that was helpful to you this past week you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working with Galliano and Angela on 2 video projects, and we've been using one of the AI models to help us build out a storyboard for the video. So it not only suggests imagery and sound to use, but also gives some very helpful recommendations on transitions. So yeah, it's just a very neat tool, and it just sparks that creative thinking on how you can talk about a topic in a different way. So
Right. David or Ryan?
I mean, one, not super original, but a lot of think tank reports I've been dropping the past couple weeks. And my favorite thing to do on the commute home is to upload it into Notebook LLM.
Yeah.
And then and not only that, but, hit the, I think the live button in Notebook LLM where you can talk to it and interject like you're a caller into a podcast. And so the 2 AI hosts will talk about the report. And if a question comes up, you just hit the button and ask a question and they'll respond. And so that's also a great way to digest content audially too. So, Ryan?
Oh, I was up about social media this week and drafted responses to AI Education Summit. And this is for family, but I vibe coded a game with my sons. And you should have seen their faces when they saw their names in the title of the game. It was just like a Space Invaders game. But man, it's just inspiring the next generation to use.
What's like the first prompt that you used?
The first prompt?
Yeah.
Oh, it was like, where do you want it to be? What do you want to gain points over time? And how do you win?
Okay.
And it just
The mechanics.
it was just incredible. Yeah.
Fascinating. All right, Martin. I think this is it for this week's show. Thank you all for joining us. Couple of announcements. I think they will drop later today, but we have a big next summit here in Washington on April 9th. It's on AI plus intelligence. So we will look at how AI really is helping the intelligence community doing its mission. We have an incredible lineup of speakers. So please join us April live here in DC. And then please don't forget the biggest AI event in DC, May 7th through 9 at the Convention Center, AI Expo. The buses will start running in the streets of DC early next week. Look up for that. Register, join us. It's going to be an unforgettable experience. We have Thursday, Friday for conversations, demos, panels on all stages. And then on Saturday, it's going to be hands-on, building, using, and doing everything possible with technology, AI, robotics, and everything else.
it's going to be fantastic. Can't wait.
I agree. So this concludes our episode, President's Tech Brief. This was episode 7. You can watch us on all our platforms. So LinkedIn, Substack, YouTube, and Instagram. Please leave us feedback on those platforms or message us and let us know how we're doing. So thank you for joining us and see you next week.